This is an Audio Realms Publishing Company presentation of Flashes by Michelle Churchill, narrated by Bobbin Beam. Coming of Age Again. I am middle-aged. I am an older woman. People call me ma'am. I call underwear foundation, and after years of the weight of gravity on my body, I now look better with foundation than without it. I am a much different woman than I was when I moved to New York more than 25 years ago. I was a fresh-faced Midwestern girl with little life experience. The wildest thing I had ever done was drink sloe gin in the college dorm room of a young man who wore pink leopard print spandex pants like Rod Stewart. I let him kiss the sloe gin off my lips and then went running back to the safety of my own dorm room. As soon as I could, I fled my North Dakota home and ran to New York. Seeking fame and fortune as a serious actress, I imagined I would quickly be discovered, and just as quickly my career would skyrocket. I would become a household name. Things didn't quite proceed as I had imagined, but landing in a city where I didn't know a living soul and where no one knew me was enough to set me free. I managed to get myself on the A-list at New York's hotspots. I dyed my auburn locks amazing shades of platinum with soft pink and gold rinses. I sang in clubs that ranged from CBGB to the Playboy Club. New York City and I embraced each other. I was where I belonged. I came of age for the first time in New York. And now I find myself coming of age again. Menopause. I am in menopause. I am at my beginning. Again, I have come of age. We all do it. We all do it differently. Hormone replacement therapy, hot flashes, loss of sex drive, increased sex drive, the tragedy of new facial hair, fear of bone loss, and antidepressants. None of us knows what will come next, and very few of us share our secrets. I have spent the last few years discussing these issues with girlfriends. While we have shocked and surprised each other, we have also found comfort in our common stories. After years of being single and keeping my eyes on nothing but my career, it was time to take control of my body and myself. I had just gone through a record emotional dry spell. I felt very alone, but I imagined I wasn't in a place so different from other women. We women in the workplace spend years losing ourselves in order to gain career advancement that, even if it does come, is never as satisfying as we thought. We arrive at a time in our late 30s and through our 40s when men take second place to career and either don't notice us or assume we must be a lesbian because we haven't noticed them. It is the time when a woman gains a reputation in the workplace for being a bitch. Don't get me wrong, we can be bitches during this time, but for the most part, we are really more misunderstood than bitchy. Despite the fact that our bodies and minds are going through a change no man can ever comprehend, we remain relatively level-headed and make incredibly sound decisions. We simply will not do it with the same compassionate and loving smile we had in our 20s. We can no longer tolerate the expectation that we will relinquish to a man the credit for a job well done. Every woman should know that the dry spell is over when you release yourself and allow yourself to say the M word, with or without the big job, a loving partner in your life, or personal wealth. It happens. Menopause. Ready, willing, and much more stable. For months, I have been, for want of a better word, distracted. As my menstrual cycle became more irregular, I have physically and emotionally gone back in time to puberty when my cycle was first irregular. Certainly, my hormones were as wacky now as they were then, perhaps for a different reason, but the result was the same. I could think of nothing but men. I wouldn't say sex, even though that was true most of the time, but I thought about their legs and the hair on their bodies. I thought of how their hands would feel holding mine. It was never really personal, just an ever-present desire to have male contact in any way I could. So, how does a single woman of 48 living in New York City accomplish that male closeness? Raging hormones were skewing my judgment. Going out to bars would be disastrous. Bookstores? Grocery stores? Work? No. This is New York City, and most of the men I have met over the years are either gay, married, or both. I decided to turn to the only thing I had a true relationship with over the last 10 years, my computer. I signed up for every online dating service I could find that didn't seem pornographic in nature. They all worked differently. Some are black holes of mystery where information goes in and never comes back out. Some take the information and decide who you should possibly meet. This particular system seems even less reliable than my friends' feeble attempts to set me up over the years. Then there are those dating services where you can perform searches, send flirtatious notes, or, if you're feeling truly bold, an email. What I found interesting about meeting men on the internet is that it didn't seem to work that differently than in real life. The men do the approaching while I search and review profiles, and occasionally send a brief message to potential dates. Perhaps it was an initial shyness or maybe just being out of practice, but I felt it was my duty to wait. The emails began. At first, I was surprised. There were young men and old men alike showing interest. What were they looking for? A date? Marriage? Sex? Have they read my profile? The picture actually looks like me. Are they blind? Did they actually read my age? My first date. Within 48 hours, the first viable flirtation came in. Mr. Handsome was about my age and attractive with a similar career path. Since, unlike me, he had a penis of his own, Mr. Handsome was still gainfully employed. I was optimistic. After the exchange of several email pleasantries, we agreed to meet for a date. I was nervous because it had been so long since I had been on an actual dinner date. I can't even recall having had a date in the last decade. I wasn't sure how to act or what to wear. I was a 48-year-old woman who had to have a girlfriend come over to help me pick out what to wear. A couple hours passed while I modeled possible outfits and worked on hair and makeup. I was beside myself. My girlfriend suggested a drink, but I decided it would be wrong to be drunk at the beginning of my date. I considered taking a Valium, but realized that could end badly as the evening progressed. I decided that a smart cocktail upon arrival at the restaurant would ease my nerves enough. If it was really bad, I'd just skip dinner and come home. My makeup was perfect, and my hair looked good. I waited for Mr. Handsome to pick me up for dinner. So now comes my first lesson learned. Men do not always represent themselves in an honest fashion, especially when it's done anonymously. While I did somewhat recognize him when he arrived, the picture must have been old, very old. An entirely different person came to pick me up. He was older, grayer, and heavier. Amazingly, he seemed completely unaware of it. He chatted easily about the wonders of himself, and although I still can't figure out how he worked it into the conversation, Mr. Handsome even referred to his small ass. His ass, by the way, was roughly the size of Iowa. As if that weren't enough, he was rude to the waitstaff. It was the longest dinner on record. I think the feeling was mutual. I never heard from him again. The Mrs. Robinson fantasy. The emails came pouring in. Thank God. Most online dating services allow you to initially communicate anonymously and block unwanted attempts at communication. I had a couple of flirtations that seemed as if they might go somewhere, but it was still too soon to tell. Then along came an entirely different kind of flirtation. He was cute, fair, and younger than springtime. He began with what seemed like a sincere question about my online profile. He wondered if I truly loved dinosaur bones. We exchanged several anonymous emails revealing only the information we had chosen to share and what was supposed to be a recent photo. He was only 36. I wondered why he liked me, and I asked him why he had chosen to flirt with a woman so much older. Was he typically attracted to older women? He said I was beautiful, and the instant messaging conversations began. The first instant message was more than flirtatious, but it didn't cross the line. He was funny, charming, and sexy. The following night, we had another instant messaging encounter. This time, the tone was a bit beyond flirtation, and I enjoyed his boldness. I agreed to meet him for a drink and gave him my phone number. Regression. The funny thing about getting older is that we suddenly find ourselves doing things we did when we were younger, like slumber parties. In celebration of my 48th birthday, I had plans for an overnight getaway with a fellow menopausal woman. We ran off to a bed and breakfast. Her fantastic husband stayed behind to care for their beautiful daughter. She and I dined on steak and shared a bottle of bubbly to celebrate my birthday. We spent the evening talking about men and menopause. We shared our stories of hot flashes and supported each other in lowering the temperature of the room to somewhere near freezing. She spoke lovingly of her husband, and I confessed my intention to pursue men on the internet. I told her that my lovely weekend was to be topped off with a date. As fate would have it, my new young suitor happened to be from her hometown. We were tormented as to what to do. Should she drive me back to New York City? Should I come to her house and have my date in a small town? The planning was elaborate. How would I get home? What if this date was as bad as the first? You would have thought we were teenagers. We decided she would bring me back to her house. I would have my date in her town, come back and sleep in her spare bedroom if it was late. Alternatively, I'd borrow her car and drive myself home that night. The planning was ridiculous. The main difference between this and 7th grade was that we didn't pass one single note. My date with Benjamin. On the day of the date, he called me, and I explained that I had found myself at a friend's house in his hometown. He offered to drive me home and take me out in the city. Without hesitation, I agreed. So much for the mad planning of menopausal women. Frantically, I showered and dressed while having a hot flash. It was August. While my friend is also having hot flashes, her husband is very thin and never hot. He had no understanding of why I was sweating, swelling, yelling, crying, and gasping for breath. I had 15 minutes to be ready. The solution came in the form of teething rings left in the freezer from years gone by, placed between and under each breast. I was just beginning to breathe normally when the doorbell rang. My friend and I were paralyzed. Her husband pretended not to notice our overreaction. Insisting that my friend stay in the kitchen, I knew her nose would be pressed against the window as I left. I went to answer the door for my mystery date. He was exactly as I had imagined, young, cute, and from what I could tell by his emails, incredibly smart. Stepping out with my most vivacious self, I hopped into his car and nervously talked the entire 30-minute drive to my apartment in the city. We say we are going out for a drink. I was sure that wouldn't happen. He was looking to play Benjamin to my Mrs. Robinson, and I was looking for a bit of a tune-up. It had been so long since I had sex that I wondered if it was really like riding a bike. We arrived to my neighborhood, and he offered to carry my overnight bag up to the apartment. While it was true my doorman could have taken care of the bag for me, I didn't protest. I invited my Benjamin in for a drink. We sat on opposite ends of the sofa and sipped scotch. This was the first time in years that I had been alone in a room with a man where business wasn't the issue before us. I had no idea what to say, and I somehow thought the thing to do was dazzle him with my big brain. I may have amazed him with my big brain that night, but I believe my big breasts astounded him even more. We talked for a while, but in what I believe was an effort to shut me up, he soon leaned in to kiss me. I was thrilled that my lips remembered what to do. We fumbled for a while in the living room. He was kissing me and climbing on top of me, and all I could think about was the fact that I couldn't remember the last time I had been in that position. "Can you show me your bedroom?" "Sure." I had never been so unsure. He was a bit nervous and admitted that being with an older woman, a real-life Mrs. Robinson, was a fantasy. My Benjamin may have been just as nervous as I was. In the blink of an eye, he was naked and pulling me toward the bed. His mouth never left mine as his hands struggled to gain access to my breasts. I pulled my shirt over my head and removed my four-hook bra for him. He smiled gratefully and, pushing me back onto the bed, lost himself for a moment between my breasts. Flipping my skirt up, he pulled off my panties and in seconds was on top and inside of me. A couple of thrusts, and he was done. He had a rocking orgasm followed by embarrassment that he had finished so quickly. He was just too excited about fulfilling his Mrs. Robinson fantasy. I was just glad that I could excite that kind of reaction in a young man. It was all over very quickly, and my world wasn't rocked. That said, it was lovely, and if he ever reads this, he should know he was responsible for giving me back a little freedom. My appeal to the other sex had been reestablished in my own mind. I was ready and confident enough to continue. It's just too bad that we didn't have another go at it. Now I would be able to oblige with a little supporting foundation, emotional and otherwise. Round 2. I was feeling alive for the first time in years. My mind and body began to awaken. Sexual feelings were rising up regularly, and I began to notice that men actually looked at me as I walked down the street. I felt surer of myself, and my assurance made me even more confident at work. It was as if a door was opening and light was just beginning to break through. After a few days, the emails started coming in fast and furious. Despite the fact that I was rejecting most of the emails out of hand, I had a running correspondence going on with several men at the same time. I could think of nothing but men. I seemed to have absolutely no control. I could stop drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes, but I could not stop my hormonal surges and urges and constant thoughts about men. My girlfriends were asking for a flow chart. They couldn't keep everyone straight. I was just giving thanks that the men were all straight and decided to ride this wave of men. As one 60-year-old man was asking for permission to call me, or if I was not comfortable with that, to call him, I got an email from another 60-year-old. By the time his second email arrived, this new, older man apparently had a birthday. His profile now said he was 61. I panicked a bit at crossing the 60-year mark. I looked at his photo. Either his photo was nearly as old as I was, or he was lying about his age. I responded to his email and told him how good he looked for his advanced years. He admitted that he had just turned 31 and had lied about his age because of his attraction to older women. 31 seemed to be too young, but 61 seemed to be a bit too old. In order to ease my discomfort when discussing him with my girlfriends, I decided to dub him the faux 60-year-old. The real issue at hand was whether or not I was on a downward slope to ruin. Was it wrong for me to be considering a date with this very young man? We exchanged some charming emails and moved quickly to chatting online. The first chat session was filled with a bit of personal information, teasing and political discussion, which was always good for me. We agreed to meet for a drink the following evening. I logged off the internet and wondered what I had done. This one seemed to progress very quickly to the meeting phase, and I was worried that I was about to meet my Mr. Goodbar. I woke up the next morning all aflutter and spent a good part of the day preparing for the evening. His internet profile said he was very tall, so I was sure to put on high shoes. The faux 60-year-old had selected the perfect spot to meet for smart cocktails. There were comfortable chairs and sofas and dim lighting, which was always good for an older gal. When I arrived, he was waiting at the bar in a navy suit and a baby blue shirt with no tie. His skin was the color of coffee ice cream, and his eyes were green. This beautiful specimen of a man stood to greet me. He kept going until his full 6-foot frame was before me. "Hello." His voice was like honey. He smiled and presented me with a dozen yellow roses. Now perhaps he had done this before and since, but then he explained, I just knew this shade of yellow would be perfect with your hair. I was a goner. Amazingly, he was not only charming but also smart. We talked for hours over smart cocktails and then had a little smooch. The smooch turned into a full-fledged kiss that made my toes curl. If we had been standing at the time of that first kiss, my right foot would have popped up, just like in a Doris Day movie. His fingers brushed my neck, and I tasted the bourbon on his tongue as he kissed me. Let's get out of here. All I could do was follow his lead. He kissed me on the way out of the bar. We stopped walking down the street to kiss. We kissed at the stoplights. He walked me to my door, and we kissed some more. It was an actual makeout session, truly a lovely thing. Kissing is seriously underrated. We should all spend some serious time on serious kissing. Faux 60-year-old went home that night with nothing but kisses. He left me breathless. I stayed awake just thinking about his kisses. The next day, I could think of nothing but his mouth. We agreed to meet again that Thursday. I planned to cook and selected a dish that would be fine the next day with friends, should he arrive and either one or both of us discovered we had made a horrible error in judgment. He did come that Thursday. A little initial nervousness passed with a lovely conversation. I am a consummate cook, but I was nervous as he watched me prepare the simple meal I had planned. I roasted fresh asparagus and sliced vine-ripened tomatoes to accompany the perfectly roasted chicken I had placed on the counter to rest. Too nervous to carve, I offered faux 60-year-old the knife and brushed up against him as I placed an apron over his head. After dinner, we took our wine glasses to the living room and put on a little Etta James. He started with slow kisses and then pulled me closer to him. His powerful embrace held me up as I melted beneath his touch. He looked into my eyes as his finger traced the curve of my lower lip and chin to my cleavage. He kissed my neck as his hands moved to unbutton my blouse. I didn't protest as he unhooked my bra and then took my nipple into his mouth. Take me to your bed. I willingly obliged, leading the way and leaving a trail of clothes in our wake. His youth and eagerness nearly overwhelmed me. His brown skin looked lovely against my white sheets, and even lovelier against my own white skin. We had sex for hours, easily changing positions as if it were a choreographed dance. His strong body pushed my body to its limits. I couldn't remember the last time my legs had been so far apart. I certainly couldn't remember the last time something that large had been between them. While we did take short breaks for food and a brief walk to purchase more condoms, he was my menopausal male muse until he left on Sunday, 4 days later. The following day, I began to research yoga classes in the city.